My name is Susan Easton Black. I'm an emeritus professor of church history and doctrine at Brigham Young University. Today I'm going to be talking about the road to Bethlehem. The road to Bethlehem, I think we all know the Christmas story. I'd just like to share it with you in some type of detail. I hope you're going to enjoy it. We start first by saying a few words of Isaiah. We know that when Isaiah wrote, he talked about that there would be this most beautiful virgin and that she would bring forth a child, and the child would be wonderful counselor, the mighty God. And so what you may not know is that for generations, literally hundreds of years, that young Jewish girls used to imagine that perhaps they could be that prophesied virgin. But as years came and went, pretty much that tradition seemed to go the way of all the earth, and even the old men refused to dream dreams about even the possibility. The reason is that King David, when he had ruled over Judea, 1,000 years had come and gone as we now begin the story of Christmas. What happened during those 1,000 years to Judea is pretty tragic as well as interesting. We know that Judea was ruled by Babylon, by Egypt, by Greece, and since 63 BC, by Rome. The leader of Rome at that time was a man named Caesar Augustus. He was viewed as a god to some of his people. For Caesar Augustus, he ruled what was called the Roman Empire. You can see on here the Roman Empire, and you can see that it spread throughout what was called the known world. Rome believed they controlled at that time up as far north as the British Isles and down into Spain and to Africa and Italy and the Middle East. Well, with all of this, Rome by the time of 63 BC was very organized and divided this vast territory into 30 provinces. Much like you'd say the United States is divided into 50 states, the Roman Empire was divided into 30 provinces. Of all of those provinces, the one we care the most about is the province of Syria. Syria, then, you'd say it's one of 30. It was ruled by men who reported to Caesar, who were, you'd say, of the higher class, or at least viewed as such. They were senators. And within Syria, you divide it much out like we would divide our state into counties, but they divided it into provinces and principalities. The province that we care about within Syria was called Palestine by the Romans, but the Jews called it Judea. So look what we've learned so far. We've learned that the setting of the birth of the Savior, we know that there had been a long tradition that a beautiful maiden would bring forth the Son of God, and he would be wonderful, the mighty God, the counselor, and so forth. We know that for Judea had been ruled by many countries, and by 63 BC by Rome, and that Rome had divided its vast territories into 30 provinces. And in those provinces, the one we care about is Syria, as we talk about the birth of Christ. And then you come down to Palestine within Syria, and the Roman appointed a leader over Palestine, which the Jews called Judea, was Herod. Now, Herod is known as Herod the Great. I don't think many of us would give ourselves that title, but apparently Herod did. Herod can trace his heritage to Esau, so you'd say he's not from the 12 tribes of Israel. He claims that he is a Hebrew, a Jew by belief, but obviously those in the house of Israel have a hard time believing him. Well, how in the world did Herod, who's not in a senatorial class and who, as far as we can tell, has never met Caesar Augustus, how did he come to the attention of such a great leader as to be appointed head of Palestine? And the answer goes to this. Some of you may remember the old movie Cleopatra with Liz Taylor and Richard Burton. Richard Burton played Mark Antony. For Herod the Great, he literally courted the favor of Mark Antony. He even rebuilt one fortress there in Jerusalem and named it the Antonia Fortress. He was also a friend to Cleopatra. It is now believed that Mark Antony and Cleopatra put forth the name of Herod to be over that small area of Palestine. Well, Herod was a builder, and truly he was great in many respects, especially as it came to building. He had taken that old, what used to be Solomon's temple, and then later Zerubbabel temple, and he's now built a temple that will be called Herod's temple, there on the mound in Jerusalem. In addition, he's built Caesareas, he's built Colosseums, he's done all kinds of building, and obviously was favored for what he had done by Caesar Augustus. However, the faithful Orthodox Jews did not like him. One reason was he called soldiers to come into the holy city of Jerusalem, and they literally destroyed much of the genealogical work that had been done there in the temples. But Caesar Augustus wasn't quite that sure of Herod's personality. At one point he said, quote, "It is better to be Herod's pig than to be his son," which means that Caesar Augustus knew that Herod had killed his son, but as a believer or a Hebrew, that he would never eat anything from a pig. So it was better to be Herod's pig than to be his son. You had a better chance of living. Now, with that as a background, we go from large to small, and we turn to what is called the course of Abia. The course of Abia is pretty interesting. You could almost call it the quorum of Abia. As you get the Jewish people coming back to Jerusalem, they came back with 4 courses and eventually built that up to 24 again. Now, the course of Abia was a priesthood course of the Levites, and this priesthood course was course number 8. And why is this significant? You'd say in that course is a man named Zacharias. And Zacharias and his wife Elisabeth lived in the hill country of Judea, but every year, twice a year, he was required, as a member of the course of Abia, to go to the temple square. And when you go to the temple square, no matter what the geography, you're always going up because you're going up to the holiest part in the holy city. Now, the course of Abia had assignments at the temple square. The assignments would be to put salt that had lost its savor out on the stones so that the worshipers would not fall. Another assignment would be to put incense on the holy altar, and yet another assignment would be to accept money into the treasury, animals that were presented for sacrifice, and so forth. Now, if we were to look at our calendar and to say, when was the course of Abia? What weeks were they required to go? If we did an overlay of our current calendar, we would say the first week in April and the first week in October. So it's not the fiscal year as you divide it January to June, but it is the course of Abia dividing it April and October, much like our conference times. Now, when the men of that course left the hill country of Judea, the first thing they would do as they got up to the temple square would be to go into the hall of what was called the Hall of Polished Stones, which no longer exists on the temple square. In that Hall of Polished Stones, they would have prayers like a devotional. They would repeat scriptures from the time of Moses, and there would be much worshiping that went on. But in addition to that, they would receive assignments that they would fulfill during the week. In other words, this group would be assigned salt on the stones and so forth. The very favorite experience was a time when they came to the casting of lots, which that would be the climax of their devotional. Now, the casting of lots was not throwing of dice, but typically done with sticks. So one of the head men of the course of Abia would have sticks in his hand, and he put his two hands together, and then he'd go from man to man, and you would pull the stick. If you pulled out a stick that was short, it was said you got the short stick, therefore you didn't get the, pinnacle experience that would occur for at least one person that week in the course of Abia. If you got the long stick, it meant that you had a right to go to the holy altar in the temple. Now, on that occasion, if you got the long stick and you had the right to go in, you then also had the right to choose two men that would, in some sense, go with you, almost like counselors. And so on this occasion, we know that Zacharias pulled the long stick. Therefore, he has a right now to go into the Holy of Holies. What would happen is that the two counselors would head into the temple first. What their job was to do, or the two extra men, not Zacharias, but they would head in and they would make sure, as they parted the curtain to go into the holy altar area, notice they're not going into the Holy of Holies. You only went there on the Day of Atonement, and it had to be the high priest, so it couldn't be someone from the course of Abia, but the course of Abia could go into where there was the holy altar. And so the two men, like counselors, would go in and they would part the curtain to where the holy altar was, and they would make sure that there was a table with shewbread. Now, there needed to be 12 loaves of bread, and each loaf representing one of the 12 tribes of Israel. So they would check that out and make sure it was good. They would make sure that the Ark of the Covenant, you see in the middle, that coals were there, things were cleaned off from any debris from perhaps a day before. And then they would also make sure that the golden candlestick was there, which represented then the days of creation, the 7 days of the week. Once they made sure everything was in readiness, they then backed out of the temple. And the reason they backed out is that you could never turn your back onto the Holy of Holies. And so once you had been that close and you'd seen the holy altar, you would then take mincing steps, you would back up, and once they were then out of the temple, they could turn around. This was now the signal for, in this case, Zacharias to enter. As Zacharias began to enter, you get men with ram horns that are on the outside walls of Jerusalem. They begin to blow their horns, which indicates that every person there in Temple Square is to lay flat on the ground with their arms now facing the temple. So wherever they were doing, whatever work they were doing, nothing was more important than to have the one man that had been chosen to put incense on the altar. So they would lay flat with their arms outstretched, and they would lay in that condition until, in this case, Zacharias would come out. So as Zacharias enters the holy temple, the men outside are laying flat. There's no movement on Temple Square. He now goes inside, and he attempts now to put, like so many priests have done from different courses before, every week now for so long, he attempts to put the incense on the altar. But as he does so, his feet are arrested as he sees an angel. And this is an old Christian photo. We know that Gabriel did not have wings. Gabriel means man who is sent by God, and Zacharias means remembered of Jehovah. And the angel has a message for elderly Zacharias, and it was, "Fear not." And you'd say, why is he fearful? Well, if you were to look at Solomon's temple, Zerubbabel's, and now Herod's, this is the very first time it is reported that an angel's been seen in that temple. And for Zacharias it is, "Fear not, Zacharias, for thy prayer is heard, and thy wife Elisabeth shall bear thee a son, and thou shalt call his name John." Now notice for Zacharias, he's known his wife. He knows she's past childbearing years, and he now questions, how can this be so? And he's looking basically for a sign. How can I know this? And we know that Zacharias is now stricken dumb, meaning he is unable to speak. Well, can you imagine if you were one of the priests in his course and you're laying down outside and you're going, "He's not coming out. He's not coming out." You know, we've never had somebody not come out. I mean, has he had a heart attack? Do we need to worry? Should somebody go in? We've never had that precedent. And they wait, and suddenly Zacharias comes out, and he's not speaking. Well, as great as the story is of Caesar Augustus and Herod the Great rising to power because he knows Cleopatra and Mark Antony, wow, isn't that a great story? You got Zacharias, and he's seen an angel. Okay, we now turn our attention away from the holy city to Nazareth. We know that the angel Gabriel was sent from God to another place, and it was a city of Galilee. It's about 30 miles from Galilee. It's named Nazareth. It's like a watch place. Some will say there are only 75 homes in the area. There's only a population about 400. Any way we look at it, Nazareth is small and basically very insignificant. In other words, you can't find the name Nazareth in the Old Testament. And you flip through the Old Testament, you go, come on, where is Nazareth? And Nazareth only becomes prominent because of somebody named Jesus of Nazareth. So Gabriel now comes to Nazareth, and he comes specifically to a young woman whose name is Mary. Now, Mary, of course, will be this long-sought-for virgin who will bring forth then the Son of God. Mary at the time is espoused to a man named Joseph the carpenter. Now, notice in Scriptures, you never see Joseph without his title. And you'd say, Joseph the carpenter, kind of like Susan the school teacher. And I'm going, well, how it was, remember, it had been 1,000 years since the Jews had ruled each other, 1,000 years since King David. So if a faithful Jewish man were to be involved in any kind of politics, whether it be Babylon, Greece, Rome, well, you're not really faithful, right? And so the way that you could show that you were faithful to your religion and to Jehovah was you always took on the title of a trade. And then when you left your home, you typically wore an emblem of your trade so that there would be no question, were you a Herodian? Were you a publican? Do you support Rome? Do you support the Syrian oppressed soldiers? I mean, where do you stand? So you'd say Joseph the carpenter, he could walk outside of any dwelling, and as long as he had a wood chip behind his ear, you'd go, oh, I know who he is. He's a faithful man. And you'd say if you were a baker, you always wore your baker's hat. If you were a dyer of cloth, you had a little piece, extra piece of cloth somewhere on your personage, and it was typically purple because purple was the most difficult color to make coming from seashells. And You'd say if you were a shepherd and you want to show you're a good shepherd, you always had a robe that was larger on your right side. If you're a rider, you had some kind of quill, and so it went. So Mary is espoused to a man named Joseph the carpenter. Okay, what does it mean espoused? Another word for espoused is betrothed. It doesn't mean like engaged. You hear of people, one day they're engaged, one day they're not. Next day they're engaged, next day they're not. It doesn't mean that suddenly two people run off by themselves or up by the temple. He gives her a ring, they come back and they announce to a family they are engaged. I go, no, it's not like any of that. A spousal or betrothal was a very formal ceremony, and it was undertaken where witnesses could see it. Typically, in an espousal, you get the young woman's house, and the man who wants to marry the young woman will come in, and he will build like a canopy with pillars. And he will have a couple of pillars, a canopy over, and family, everybody will be there, and he will invite the young woman to come inside the canopy, and he will ask her if she will be his. If she says yes, how you know it's yes is that he hands her a coin. If she takes the coin, they are espoused, and then there is an official writing document. From the espousal ceremony, the young woman is known as the wife, the man is known as the husband, although they will never live together. And any communication between the two will be by family or friends. And for a year it will be like that. If during that year the husband were to die, the woman would be a widow because, after all, she had been his wife. Now, was there a way to end an espousal? For a man, he could end it anytime through the year. He could come back to the woman, he could rebuild the canopy, and he could ask her for the coin back. The man could get out of it for almost any reason, including he saw Joni down the street. She was cuter than Susie, therefore I want this thing done, and he could get out of it. For the woman, the only way she could get out of an espousal betrothal is if she could show that the man had a very smelly occupation, that he was a tanner of hides, that he was a collector of dung, and if she could prove that and that she just couldn't bear it, she could be out. But basically, an espousal, you're in, you're stuck, you're happy, I hope. Okay. We know that Mary is now espoused to Joseph the carpenter. We assume it's evening, but the angel Gabriel now appears to her and tells her that truly she is the mother of God. Notice, behold, the handmaiden of the Lord is her response. Be it unto me according to thy word. Now, things begin to dramatically change. Gabriel also tells her about a kinswoman. We're not quite sure of their relationship. Cousins, some assume, of an older cousin, Elisabeth, and that she is going to have a child, and the child will be named John, right? She's Zacharias' wife. So Mary now goes to see Elisabeth. Artists would have us believe that she goes alone from Nazareth to the hill country of Judah to be with Elisabeth. But that would never happen. If a woman was espoused, her family was to guard her, to care for her, so that nothing would happen to her untoward until the final marriage date. And so you wouldn't send her off by herself, especially when Rome ruled and Syrian impressed soldiers would be along the roads. And so Mary then will go with some kind of entourage. More than that, when she went outside, because she is a wife, she would have to veil her face. Notice when she entered into the house of Zacharias, she now salutes Elisabeth. And Elisabeth, blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb. In other words, Elisabeth knows. And for Mary and Elizabeth, it's one of the few times in scriptures that you get two women talking together. And typically it's a man talking to a woman, but in this case, Mary and Elizabeth talk to each other, and Mary now knows that she has a confidant. And she talks about, well, she quotes the Song of Hannah. She quotes amazing scriptures and indicates of all the wonderful things the Lord has done for House of Israel, what he has done for me. Well, she stays, estimated about 3 months, and now she comes back, and Mary looks different, and Joseph the carpenter has seen her as she now returns. And he's concerned. He has two choices. One, he can end the espousal, but he's got to go on Thursday to the local rabbis that meet and counsel, and then present his case that in this case perhaps Mary has not been faithful to him. So he has a choice. He can end their espousal publicly, or he can end it privately. Joseph the carpenter has made the decision that he's going to end it privately. In other words, there will be a bill of annulment, bill of divorce, and that the reasons for it don't need to be known outside of that small family unit. And at this point, Joseph has a dream. And in the dream, he's told, Joseph, thou son of David, fear not to take unto thee Mary thy wife. In other words, notice she's called wife because of the espousal ceremony. And so at this point, for a Jewish man to cast aside a good dream, you would challenge the favor of God. And we know that Joseph and Mary will be wed. Now, neither Luke nor Matthew, I don't know, maybe they just weren't romantic, but they didn't tell about the marriage ceremony. And so I'm going to take you through a typical marriage ceremony at the time. All right, during the year-long espousal time, the woman has a coin, and in theory, she was to use the coin to make mats and to make clothing for future babies that would join her family. And for the man, his job was to build a house for his wife. He had already shown his building talents by building the pillars and the canopy in the woman's home. And so when it came time to wed, and the day of it, word went through the village so everybody knew. And the first thing that would happen is on this day, the husband was now known as a groom, and it's only a one-day thing, and the wife is known as a bride. So the husband would leave the house he had built, and you knew it was his wedding day because he would wear myrtle leaves on his hair. And that's how you knew he is the groom. He would then leave his house, and he would go to the first available house and knock on the door and ask the occupants, have you seen my bride? They would then say no, but they would then ask, but can I help you find her? They would then grab their sticks and their lamps and their oil, and they would know that the groom would go to every house in the village before he actually went to the house of his bride. And this is the way he picked up his wedding party. If you wanted to kick off a Jewish Hatfield and McCoy's kind of setup, you would say, no, I haven't seen your bride, but I'm telling you, I got a really busy day. I'd help, but I just can't go. Wow, you never would do that because don't you realize there's going to be a new family in the house of Israel? So it isn't like us where we get a wedding invite. Do you think you go, nah, what are we sending for a gift? Suddenly it's like, will you help me find my bride? And so he would go from house to house to house, And by the time it's getting dusk and evening, he finally makes it to the house of his bride. He would then ask her father, "Have you seen my bride?" The father would say yes and would bring forward then the young woman. She would be dressed in layers of clothes, not just a shirt, but she's got layers of clothes. She's got this big veil over her face. It used to be that the man would marry the woman that had the big veil over his face, but then there was, of course, Leah, the not-too-cute sister, and the conclusion was the man has a right to see the face. He has a right to know who he's marrying in the family. So the man would then, the groom, would pull back the veil, which was held on by a headband, to reveal the young woman's face. The headband, as he would see it, was filled with her dowry. In other words, layer after layer of coins, with the big coin he had given her sewn in the middle. And this was to show, I'm not high maintenance. I was able to make the mats, the children's clothes, whatever was needed, and we still have your money left. As he would see all of this wealth, he would then turn to his friends and say, "Come see the treasure I have found." Now, the friends would come forward and they would quote Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. Her price is above rubies. She has a pearly great price. They would speak of her beauty again and again and again. The friend that was not great would say, "Oh my gosh, look how much money you're getting." Nobody would say that. Finally, after the bridegroom was assured of her beauty, he would then take the veil from her face with all this kind of layers and the headband. He would throw it over his left shoulder. And then the word would go out through his large entourage of friends. The government has fallen upon his shoulders, meaning the right to form a new family in the house of Israel. Suddenly there would be great merriment. People would be waving their sticks with their, the lights. You'd have the minstrels. There's great excitement. The groom would now grab the hand of his bride, and they would skip, run, dance to where they would be married. Now, in the course of the marriage ceremony, the man would be asked, "Will you treat her," meaning the bride, "as a true Israelite male?" If she said yes, or if he said yes, then they moved the veil from the left shoulder to the right shoulder, and they were wed. Well, okay, Luke didn't tell us that. Matthew didn't tell us that. What were they thinking? But we know that Joseph and Mary were wed. The typical day to marry was always Tuesday. And you'd say, it's not like our time. It was always the third day of the week. You hear people now, they're always looking for, where's there available Friday? Okay, if I have to marry on Saturday, so be it. But back then, you would always marry on the third day of the week because as they read the Torah, the third day of the week, when the Lord pronounced the earth and his creations good, he used the word good twice. And if used twice, it meant if you married on that day, you had a guarantee that your marriage would be doubly blessed. Well, okay. Joseph and Mary are married, and at this point, a decree goes out from Caesar Augustus to all the world. And notice the world we're talking about. Do you remember that first map? Yeah, we're talking about you're up there in England, you're going all the way around through the Mediterranean, even Africa, you're over here in Syria, and the word goes out from Caesar Augustus, it's time for all the world to be taxed, which means he wants a count so that he knows how much to charge each province, like Syria, in taxes. And so it's time to be numbered in preparation for a tax. Different provinces did it differently. Some said, come to the capital city. Others said, go to the closest city where, away from your farm. You'd say in Palestine/Judea, it was, go to your land of inheritance. Now, Nazareth was the land of inheritance of Zebulun. And so it meant, Mary and Joseph, you got to go out of there. You got to go near Jerusalem, the holy city, to Bethlehem of Judea. Notice there was a Bethlehem of Galilee, but you got to go to Bethlehem of Judea because we're going to take all this house of Israel and you're to go back to your lands of inheritance. And so all went out to be taxed, everyone to his own city. Notice at the time that Joseph and Mary are going, you're looking at a long distance, probably a 5-day journey, and that it is time to be taxed with Mary as a espoused wife who is great with child. Well, as they near Bethlehem, Bethlehem means house of bread. You'd say, what could you expect to see in Bethlehem? You'd see a lot of people, a lot of men walking around with baker's hats, right? It was said in Bethlehem they made the shewbread, those 12 loaves that were given to the priests there on that holy altar. But they now head towards Bethlehem. And what they're looking for is a room. When they say there's no room in the inn, it means there's no guest chamber. Now, at this time and also at Passover, if you had an empty room, you would put a type of scarf or veil over your front door. And then when people saw the veil, they knew you had an empty room and that you could take in these travelers that were like coming home after generations. And you'd say one way of looking at it is Mary and Joseph checked it out, and hey, what we can tell, there's no room in the end. And so they went out into a very hill-pocked countryside that's all limestone, and there's all kinds of cave kind of things. And it was while there that she brought forth her firstborn son, and she wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger. Now, everyone, there's more to the story. There's shepherds, there's wise men, there's Anna and Simeon at the temple, there's miracles, there's 12 apostles, there's the atonement, there's the crucifixion, there's the resurrection, the story of Jesus. It is truly, as the shepherds said, glad tidings of great joy. It is God's story. It is the story of Jesus Christ. I'd like to conclude with my testimony that Mary brought forth a child, and they called his name Emmanuel, which being interpreted is God with us. For we know that for unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. How did Mary respond to his birth? She kept all these things, and notice what she did. She pondered them in her heart. May we today ponder in our heart the greatness of Christ, his birth, his atonement, crucifixion, resurrection, the great things that he has done for each of us. I testify that Jesus is the Christ, and I say this humbly in Jesus' name. Amen.